Let us continue our journey into ancient Greece and Rome and their civilizations. Chapter 2. Athens. Athenian Democracy. Athens was one of the largest of the Greek city-states and also one of the most democratic. Today we remember it as the birthplace of democracy. Athenian democracy developed gradually. Over many decades, monarchy gave way to aristocracy, aristocracy to oligarchy, and then oligarchy to democracy. The Athenians also had to get rid of a few tyrants. Over the years, more and more people won the right to participate in government. By 500 before the Common Era, a recognizably democratic system was firmly established. At the center of the Athenian democracy was the assembly. The assembly passed laws, imposed taxes, and voted on issues of war and peace. All Athenian male citizens were allowed to participate in the assembly. Before deciding an issue, the members of the assembly would debate the proposal. Then they would vote by holding up their hands. If a majority of those present supported the proposal, it would be accepted. A citizen is a person who is legally recognized as a member or subject of a country or state. The assembly also had the power to ostracize or banish citizens who might pose a danger to the polis. Remember, the polis is the city-state. Again, this was done by voting. During ostracism votes, each citizen was allowed to scratch another citizen's name on a piece of pottery called an ostrakon. If enough people scratched the same name, the ostracized citizen had to leave the city-state and stay away for 10 years. However, he was allowed to keep his property, and at the end of 10 years he was allowed to return. The assembly was assisted by a smaller council called the bouli, which was made up of 500 members chosen by lot. Each member served a year-long term, and no citizen could serve more than 2 terms. The bouli decided which issues needed to be brought before the assembly and which ones could be handled by other officials. Let's look at the word ostracize and the ostrakon. In ancient Athens, it meant to send a person away from the city. Today we still use the word, and it means to shun or ignore a person. So if you are ostracized, you are literally almost pushed out of a community. The legal system was also quite democratic. Athenian law was divided into 2 sections. There were public laws, which had to do with the city-state, and private laws, through which people could work out their disagreements. If someone broke a public law, he would have to pay a fine or face the penalty that had been decided upon by the assembly or by the bouli. If someone had a disagreement with a neighbor, he could take his neighbor to court near the marketplace and have a jury decide his case. Athenian juries were larger than ours today. In some cases, as many as 501 citizens sat on a single jury. The idea behind these giant juries was to reduce the risk of bribery and corruption. It's easier to bribe a dozen jurors than it is to pay off several hundred. Because the juries were so big, nearly all citizens served on juries at some point in their lives. Jury members voted by placing tokens called hubs in a jar. Solid hubs stood for not guilty, and hollow hubs meant guilty. The fourth element of Athenian democracy was a board of 10 generals known as the strategoi. These generals directed the army. They were elected each year by a tribe or group to the assembly. There were 10 groups in all. A jury is a group of people who listen to information presented during a trial in a court and make decisions about whether someone is guilty or innocent. Corruption is illegal or dishonest behavior, often by people in a position of power. Limits of Athenian democracy. It is important to understand that Athens was not completely democratic by modern standards. You read earlier that all Athenian citizens were allowed to participate in the assembly. However, not everyone in the polis was a citizen. To qualify as a citizen, a person had to be male, at least 18 years of age, not a slave, not enslaved, and the son of 2 Athenian parents. Women, children, enslaved people, and foreigners living in Athens were not citizens. Therefore, they could not vote in the assembly or serve on juries. Although Athenian women played an important role in religious affairs, they had almost no political rights. They could not own property. They were always under the control of a male relative, such as a husband, father, brother, or even an adult son. This male relative decided whom the woman would marry. If her husband died, she could be remarried without her consent. Sometimes, if a husband knew he was dying, he would decide before his death whom his wife should marry next. Women could not participate in debates in the assembly. They could not attend certain public events. Girls might receive some education at home, but they were not sent to school. Instead of participating in polis politics, women were expected to bear children and tend to their families. The family was very important in ancient Athens, and Athenian women were expected to uphold it. As a busy trading city, Athens opened its doors to many foreigners. These foreign residents, known as metics, played an important role in the Athenian economy. Many metics were artisans, craftsmen, or merchants. Although some metics were presented with honorary citizenship, most never became citizens. Enslaved people had it even worse. They made up as much as a quarter or a third of the population. A rich citizen might have hundreds of enslaved workers to run his household, farm, or business. A smaller household might have between 10 and 50. Only the poor did not depend on slave labor. Enslaved workers cleaned, shopped, cooked, carried water, washed clothing, and helped raise children. Some enslaved workers were educated so they could help teach the children in a family. Others were accomplished musicians who provided entertainment. But even the most talented enslaved person lacked any political rights. Although Athenian enslaved workers could sometimes buy their freedom, they could not purchase Athenian citizenship. Because of these requirements, only about 40,000 of the nearly 300,000 people living in Athens and the surrounding countryside qualified as citizens. So Athenian democracy definitely had its limits. Still, we should not dismiss what the Athenians achieved. In 500 BCE, you could not find another place where so many of the people were involved in political affairs. Later societies would carry democratic ideals even further. But it was the Athenians who took the all-important first steps. Athenian education. Because the Athenians believed that every citizen should play a role in the government of the city-state, they took pains to prepare young men to become good citizens. They believed a good education would benefit the polis as well as the individual. A citizen needed to be able to take part in debates in the assembly and law courts. He also needed to know how to argue, how to defend his own opinions, and how to criticize the ideas of others. This is why the Athenians taught their sons rhetoric. Along with rhetoric, Athenian schools taught logic, reading, writing, arithmetic, and music. Boys learned to play a stringed instrument called the lyre and memorized sections from 2 epic poems attributed to the ancient Greek poet Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Rhetoric is the skill of using words effectively in speaking or writing. Logic is the study of ways of thinking and making well-reasoned arguments. An epic poem is a long poem that tells the story of a hero's adventures. In addition to academic instruction, every young man was given 2 years of military instruction and many years of physical education. Athenian men were expected to exercise in a gymnasium. This was not an enclosed building like a modern gym, but a park-like area outside the city where men gathered in the cool shade of the trees to exercise their bodies and relax their minds. The men did not wear clothes when they exercised. In fact, the word gymnasium comes from a Greek word meaning to exercise naked. In addition to exercising, they competed in athletic competitions. When an Athenian male got a little older, he might go to a symposium. A symposium was like a banquet. Citizens gathered to eat, drink, listen to musicians, converse, and enjoy one another's company. Much wine was consumed, but many symposiums also had an educational purpose. When the members of a symposium settled down for conversation, the men took turns speaking on a chosen theme, such as love or happiness. The participants were not just gossiping or wasting time. They were sharing wisdom and reaching conclusions.